thank you very much for joining us, In-House Communications. I'm the chair of In-House, Katy Perrior. It's great to welcome you. We've already had a really packed agenda today. We've had Rishi Sunak, the Chancellor, first up this morning. We've also had the Business Secretary. But next up, I'm delighted to welcome you to this event, the Transport Secretary, Grant Shapps. So thank you very much for joining us here today. It's really, really good to have you on board. We're also joined by Katy Taylor from the Go Ahead Group, Crispin Humm from Zipabout, and Tim Strong from Arcadis. If you've not been to one of our events before, and you'd like to ask a question, you can go right ahead. It's no problem at all. This is an informal event. It's not meant to be where people bore you to tears about trains or anything like that for the next hour. I really, really would like to welcome a chat about the challenges that we face as a sector coming forward, because it's been an extraordinary year. And today's panel was meant to be focusing on innovation in transport and how we can improve the services and the customer experience as we move forward. As I said, the pandemic's thrown up immeasurable changes to travel patterns, and the behaviours the sector needs to see, or what we've done in the last few years may not be the behaviours that we have in the future. Nobody wants to see a car-led recovery, and so it would be great to hear from the panel today on how we can avoid that and give confidence and travel in terms of travelling on public transport again and trying to get back to normal wherever possible. Indeed, the government's own 10-point plan also talks about how we can achieve stopping a car-led recovery in terms of achieving our goal of net zero. And it mentions public transport and active travel. And today's a real opportunity to explore this area further. So first up, I'd like to invite opening remarks from the panel. And we've got Secretary of State for Transport. I'm going to hand over to you next, Grant Shapps. Thank you very much for joining us.
Well, thank you very much, Katy, and good afternoon to everyone. Well, there can be no denying the previous years being one of immense challenges for the country and, of course, by its very nature for the transport sector as well. But I think now, with jabs going into people's arms at an astonishing rate, it does seem that, slowly and cautiously, we are edging back towards some normality, starting with the next bit of the unlock on Monday. And as we finally start to leave the pandemic behind, the Prime Minister has set those of us in the Cabinet with a very simple challenge: to build back better. Well, when, as Conservatives, we were elected in 2019, it was on a promise to transform and to level up by investing in transport and in infrastructure. And we were signalling then, really, a fresh dawn made possible by our newfound ability to make our own rules in our own interests. And I look overseas and I see a lot of standalone countries like Singapore and South Korea and Israel who don't fear to chart their own course. They innovate, they take risks, and they create their own success. And I really think, Katy, that we can do the same, but only we actually start with an advantage. We're already a G7 economy, already larger than any of them. And that's why I'm so pleased to be here today on joining your panel to discuss how we can pack more innovation into our transport system. My department's already leading the drive on electric cars, hydrogen trains, green airliners, and in the process, creating thousands of new jobs in brand new industries. And we're working on using data and technology to revolutionize services for passengers through the National Bus Strategy I published just last week, and through a once-in-a-generation rail reform to be published soon. But in a way, I would say, colleagues, this is nothing new. From the Industrial Revolution onwards, Britain's innovation has always been our trump card. It was, after all, where the railways were invented. As we exit this pandemic, with Brexit done, we won't be afraid to play that card. I'm not ashamed to say it. I actually believe in British exceptionalism, because we've always done things exceptionally. What was once the workshop of the world can be its laboratory now as a scientific superpower, as the PM puts it, for better things to come. So let me stick my neck out here. I think, and I believe, that by embracing technology and new innovation, and yes, by being prepared to do things a little bit differently, the UK can be the largest economy in Europe by 2050. Now, of course, there'll be challenges, but we'll be ready to adapt. Post-Brexit, post-pandemic Britain will have the ability to do things more nimbly, to do things differently. We can learn from our world-beating vaccine rollout, we can apply it to the whole of our economy. A plan, early investment, A can-do attitude, that, my friends, is how we are going to build back better. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Grant. And there's so many things I would like to pick up from you in time, especially around the bus strategy, which I've been a bit geeky about because I'm really passionate about buses in terms of more people travel on buses than anywhere else, and yet they seem to be the poor relation somewhat. And so I'm going to go over to Katy Taylor. And you like buses, you've not got one Katy on this panel, you've got two, you lucky people. So Katy, if you'd like to come back in with a few comments, I'd be really, really welcome.
Yeah, brilliant. I mean, absolutely very passionate about buses. I mean, I think innovation is hugely important. And I think it's really good to remember what the purpose of innovation is. Innovation is really there, as you say, to better connect our communities, to create a healthier environment for everyone in this country in terms of climate change. And it's about attracting back customers, not just the customers we've lost through the pandemic, but actually more customers, because actually we already had jammed roads full of cars. So we actually need more people to take public transport for it to be sustainable and to create the right environment that we want. We need to make those services more efficient. We need to make it a better experience for customers and more accessible and safer. I know there's been a lot of talk recently about how safe women feel on public transport. And I think we've got a big job to do there actually to improve how safe they both are and how safe they feel. So I feel that there's lots of opportunity to be innovative and to do new and different things. I suppose I would sort of put them into sort of four main areas. So there's something there about what tickets, value for money, sort of fares, retailing, how are we doing that and making that right for the customers, right for the journeys that people want to take coming out of the pandemic. I think there's something about information. I think providing information empowers people, and people hate not being in control. So giving them better information to know what times of day buses or trains are busy, when the toilets are working, whether things are wheelchair accessible, things that are really going to make a difference to whether people can use those services and when they use them. I think it's about the actual environment itself. I think we need to be much more flexible about our on-train experiences. You know, we need to be able to take bikes on more trains, especially at weekends. We need to have a different, more flexible staycation version of a train on a Saturday than perhaps we have on a Tuesday morning. The bus strategy, you mentioned that, bus stops. Bus stops really are pretty poor across the country. Some of them are no more than just a pole and a flag on the side of a road. It's chucking it down outside my window right now. I wouldn't want to be standing at a bus stop right side out my door in this weather. If it was enclosed, if it was lit, I would feel safer. I would be more likely to take the bus. And maybe if I could park my bike there as well, then that would encourage me even more. So I think there's a lot we can do around that environment. And then obviously there's a huge amount of innovation around our actual vehicles and actually how we make them play their part, as you mentioned, in that 10-point plan around decarbonisation. And there's huge innovation there around geofencing, about electric buses, and about hydrogen. So really there's loads of different ways that innovation can really play an important part, but it all rolls up to a lot of what's already been said around delivering for our communities and delivering for the environment and making sure that we really are making things better for people.
Lots of challenges there, and I think that Crispin, would like to come in, and Crispin Humm from Zipabout, in terms of your role in delivering on that, in terms of the customer experience in the customer, improved journey for that customer.
Absolutely. Thank you very much indeed for inviting me on the panel. So Zipabout helps people move safely and easily around the world, and the personalised journey lies at the heart of that service. So we combine personalisation technology with real-time data and multimodal journey planning to provide that personalized journey service from door to door, everything that Katy was talking about in that information space. And we do that primarily on behalf of operators and local authorities. So for example, National Rail Inquiries have been using our technology to power the Alert Me service since 2018. And we've recently worked with the Department of Transport to make crowding predictions available to customers so they can travel safer. Now, the service has been so effective, we've made it available to all bus and train operating companies in the UK as well. Now, because we connect to millions of people every month, we also use the behavioural insights generated to help governments and infrastructure owners optimise and invest in their networks. So now more than ever, we see the need to personalise the journey in a way that also supports the operators and the regions they serve. Again, it's the point that Katy was making. We've recently launched our incentive to travel feature that enables transport operators to connect to brands and retailers to incentivize that return back to public transport and that return back to the high street. We've also offered our product free of charge to local authorities. So, you know, we're committed to helping the transport industry and the government kickstart a green-led recovery. And I hope to talk a lot more about how we can help.
That's really, really helpful. Thank you. And last but not least, Tim, if you'd like to come in from your view and the view from Arcadis about the opportunities that lie ahead.
Katy, thanks. I'd love to. And thanks also to everyone for inviting me to join the panel as well. As you said, my name's Tim Strong. And although I didn't know it at the time, my qualifications in philosophy, psychology, and data science set me up perfectly for a career in transport innovation. I learned my trade for a company called TRL, Transport Research Laboratory. And then I joined Arcadis a few years ago, where I'm the UK's Transport Innovation Director, leading our work on future mobility. And for those that don't know us, Arcadis, we're the leading design and engineering consultancy. We're multidisciplinary, we're global, and we're Dutch owned, which means that innovation and creativity are really in our DNA. And our purpose is simple: to improve quality of life. And we're really proud to be working on some of the UK's flagship transport infrastructure projects, such as High Speed 2 and the Lower Thames Crossing, and supporting decarbonisation of transport by helping to accelerate the shift to electric vehicles and increasing active travel and zero carbon fuels for aviation. And if I think about the theme for today's session, well, it's absolutely essential to understand customer need and current behaviour. We need to do this to deliver services that meet those needs. And we need to do this to persuade customers to behave differently and make different travel choices to align with the national and the local vision. And I think that sweet spot happens linking innovation and customers when we make it easy for people to make the right choice, however we choose to define that. Thank you.
Lots and lots to explore there from all of our panelists today. Thank you very much for your opening remarks. Secretary State, can I come back to you to talk about many of the points that we've touched upon, really around that customer experience? And you know, in the past, because of numbers, because of demand, it may have been a bit of a one-size-fits-all. And how do you see the transport system, you know, changing in the future to be more demand responsive, demand-led, as it were?
Well, so I came into this job just wanting sort of one thing. Which was, you know, why can't we just get the blooming trains to run on time? And that was my kind of, is why I asked Boris for this job. I wanted to be Transport Secretary as a frustrated train commuter for many years. And of course, it should all be about the customer. It should all be about the passenger. I mean, that should be the whole point of our transport system. And I think too much of the time, it hasn't been. It's been about the complex franchising system, whether that's on, on the trains or a fairly sort of disparate bus system for all sorts of historic reasons, which the bus strategy, which I announced last week with £3 billion behind it, seeks to, you know, bring into order. And so for me, if you want to know behind the scenes, what's the conversation I have with officials at the Department for Transport, more than anything else, it is let's make our transport system work for passengers, whether that's ticketing, contactless, data of the type that Zipabout or Go Ahead are providing and want to provide, so that people know when their transport's going to be turning up. The cleanliness of the service, the reliability of the service, etc., etc. The one thing I never wanted to do, though, Katy, was to get there, because we've actually had all-time record reliability data on our public transport. But unfortunately, what's happened in the last year is that's happened because we've not had passengers on it. That was not my plan, so I won't be taking that as a sign of success.
And Crispin, do you want to come back in on that in terms of some of the points that the Secretary of State raised around that demand-led recovery, and what can we do for customers to be more responsive to their needs? Because people are not going to be going back to work in the way that they were before. They're going to possibly have a hybrid of sometimes working from home, sometimes working in the office. You know, how do we go to events like big theatre productions or festivals or football grounds in the future? You know, how is that all going to change?
You're absolutely right. Look, it's too easy right now for me to go out my front door, jump in my car and go to wherever I need to go. It's that seamless journey, isn't it? What puts a lot of people off public transport is they need to go to many places to book and find out the details and plan that end-to-end journey. Plus the information to cover that door-to-door journey is fragmented also. if we are able to make it easier for people to plan that journey, if we make it easier for people to get that information in one place that doesn't require them to download multiple apps to do one straightforward journey, we are halfway there. And if we use the data that is created through interactions with journey planners that are already out there, we can start to understand how people want to use the network. The trouble we have at the moment, and this is a legacy in the transport sector, is the operations, the timetables are really put together by how busy the train was last week, last month, which is fine. But when the situation looks very different, like it does now, like it's going to, it's not that helpful. What you need to do is understand how people want to engage with the transport network. And that is the data that we can provide, and we are providing to the transport sector.
And Katy, how can we do that in a way where people want to feel safe? Safe in terms of, you know, they want to be on a train at 10 o'clock at night, and normally they used to be packed and now they're a little bit empty, and I don't necessarily know when I want to go back out at 10 o'clock at night again. But also, you know, safe in terms of social distancing, and just have confidence that if they go back on our networks, whether it's bus or rail, then they're going to be well managed, so that we don't end up with the kind of, you know, the old pictures that we used to see of people's faces, you know, up to the glass somewhat.
Yeah, I think you've covered a number of things there. So I think safety in terms of how safe you feel, and it's interesting, I think coming out of the pandemic, everyone is more scared probably of everything. You know, you've had that sort of fear, you've been in your house. I mean, you know, anyone here, I've got teenage children, a lot of anxiety attacks before kids have gone back to school, just because it's a different new thing that they haven't experienced for a while. I went into the office, packing was like some sort of, you know, oh my God, I'm going away. I was just going to the office, something I used to do every day. So I think people have got a huge amount of fear and anxiety going back. And then you overlay, as you say, some of that aspect as a female and somebody with accessibility needs. I think we do quite a lot. We can clearly do a huge amount more about informing people about what is and is not acceptable in these environments, making it very clear that certain behaviours are just not acceptable and that they will be called out by other people or by our colleagues. We have, you know, a huge number of colleagues on our network still. I mean, every bus has a safety guard, you know, a safety guard on that bus there to look after you. They are absolutely trained, making sure that they're trained, they know what to do, making sure it's clear that customers know what is and isn't appropriate, and making sure that any reporting to the police or the British Transport Police actually goes actioned and doesn't go unanswered and is not unsympathetic. So I think there's probably more we can do there. And as I mentioned, bus stops, making sure that they're lit. It is a fairly basic one to make sure that if you're waiting at night, you actually feel like you're visible, and that you feel that bit safer. And we're doing a lot of work around accessibility to make sure that, you know, we don't fail you, so that if you're waiting at a platform for a train, you absolutely have got somebody to help you get on that train, and you're going where you want to go, and you're not left at night somewhere that you don't want to be. So I think there's lots of things around that. The point about social distancing is a bit different. Mass transport was never really designed for people to spend at least a metre apart from each other. I think you're right in that, you know, those very, very busy carriages going into sort of London Bridge and some other London termini first thing in the morning, I think people aren't going to tolerate that, which is why I think we can do stuff around ticketing to actually move people to travel different times of day. You know, true flexible working is not the same as working from home. Working from home at the moment for me feels like just sitting at my desk. It's a slightly different desk from 8 till 6. Flexible working means you can actually work at different times of day. You could go into the office maybe at 10 o'clock or 11 o'clock. If we can get to true flexible working, then actually our transport networks work much more efficiently, because you wouldn't have to invest in that you know, 7 till 9 in the morning, but you could put more services on maybe from 9 till 11 in the evening, which again goes back to your previous point about safety, which is actually if we ran more frequent services at night, you'd make a difference. Look at what happened in London with night buses. It really changed that nighttime economy.
It's very interesting points there, and a number of them I think about that flexible working, and not just the fact that we work at home or we work in the office. It's how do we work in the future. Tim, I've got a question in from the audience, and so I hope I can come to you first, and you can tell me if you'd rather someone else answer it. But we are getting some good questions in from the audience now. If you've never asked a question before and you've never been to one of our events before, they're super relaxed, very informal. Please type your question into the chat box and it'll come through to me and I'll be able to ask it for the panel. So Tim, I've got a question here, and the question is, how can transport network support levelling up in terms of better connectivity in remote and rural communities?
That is a great question, and I'd like to give others a chance to answer it as well. But from my perspective, some of the challenges around rural transport that we've been looking at is new and emerging concepts such as mobility hubs to support those in rural areas as part of the overall approach to encourage people to change behaviours and travel behaviours and reliance on private motor vehicles to try and create new ways of delivering different low carbon transport services in those hard to reach rural areas. Far harder to crack than if you're looking at major dense urban centres. But I think, you know, that there really is a great opportunity to try and address some of those rural transport issues using these mobility hub concepts.
And Crispin, would you like to just come back in there in terms of the rural versus the city, in terms of the personalised data and the ability to connect with the transport network that you need?
You're absolutely right. They're just picking up on where Tim left off. There's a lot of technology out there that supports inner city travel. You know, you can go to London and you can travel around fairly easily. That's not quite the same when you're in a rural environment, or actually if you live outside London. Some of the really common B2C apps that you know that we're all familiar with don't allow me to travel from Essex to Birmingham. It's just not helpful. Our model, the way we've approached this, is actually to partner with the operators and build effectively a plug-in. So we're supporting the infrastructure that's already there and the channels that people already use. If you take that model, it means you're not alienating parts of the community. You're not alienating people outside the city. And it's a model that works really well. It works well for us and it works well for our clients as well. Because we work in partnership with the local authorities, we're able to share that data so they can see how people want to use the network that they provide for the people in their area. And that is really, really important. It's always going to be a massive challenge to provide an effective service for every single person in a rural environment. But if you know where the demand is, you know why people are traveling, you can provide mechanisms to deliver for the people you're trying to serve.
Thank you. I'm going to go, if I may, back to you, Grant. I've got a question live from the audience. You mentioned hydrogen in your opening remarks, and we've had lots of questions coming from the audience. It seems to be a really hot topic at the moment. But how do we need to embrace it across all forms, not just air, as the PM said, but also rail, which is waiting to be given the green light from the government?
Actually, it's already been given the green light. I've been on a hydrogen train which was backed by the government in Coventry called the Hydroflex, and taken a ride on that train. It already works. We just need to, we're resolving now actually with another chunk of government cash. You obviously have the cylinders to hold the hydrogen. We want those to be packed underneath the train, otherwise you lose a carriage to carry it, and we're doing work on that right now. But I think that hydrogen has a big future in different types of transport, different modes, as people in transport, but none of the public insist on calling it. The idea behind hydrogen is because it will only really ever work if we can develop it on sufficient scale. I've made Tees Valley a hydrogen hub, the country's first hydrogen hub, so we can pile all the different types of transport in there, research for all the different types, and do it in one location with backing from the government, backing from the industry, backing from academics and others, and make sure that we sort of steal the march on this. So that's the plan. Batteries are clearly good with things like cars. I've driven an electric car. I'm like Ed Middleband. Did you see? I've driven an electric car since I ordered it 4 years ago, I think it is now, nearly 4 years ago, and I got it a couple of years ago. But it's great for cars. But hydrogen will be important for bigger forms of transport, buses, you know, sort of lorries, perhaps maritime, air. We already have the world's first hydrogen aircraft. It's doing experimental flights from Cranfield right now, but this is my point. You've got to develop hydrogen with all the different types of transport in mind, and that's been our strategy.
And that's really showing that we are leaders in innovation as a country when we are kind of striding.
That's it. This is what I was talking about in my opening words. You know, we've got to get out there ahead of all of this, believe in ourselves and get the job done, just as we've done in the past. We're doing again, led by this infrastructure building and transport.
It's a real moment, isn't it? I mean, the pandemic has reset everything, and in transport, that's significant. I know it's affected everywhere, but it does seem to be that transport is, you know, significantly affected, and so this is the moment you could bring about real change.
I absolutely agree. I saw in the chat there's an anonymous question someone's put in the chat there. How can we make buses cool? And the answer is actually a lot of what Tim and Crispin and Katy have been saying is you've got to, first of all, you need to remove the friction from all of this. It's just got to be easy to walk on. You know, touch your phone or card and you've paid. There's no fiddling around with change. Then you want it to be warm in the winter, cool in the summer. You want there to be Wi-Fi. You want it to be comfortable. You want it to be clean. It's really noticeable in transport, if you, particularly public transport or any form actually. It's kind of what firms like ride-hailing apps have done. They've made it easy to do things which actually previously were not particularly cool. It was never particularly cool to call a cab, you know, from the local cab firm. Somehow ride-hailing apps made that something that young people wanted to do. My kids would do it all the time. We have to do that with all forms of transport. We have to make it easy, accessible, remove the friction to getting on board, and people will want to use it because it's a better alternative for getting about.
And can we talk for a second, therefore, about kind of multimodal in that respect? Because it's that end-to-end journey where people kind of, it goes a bit wrong. So you might get a taxi to the station, you might get on your train, and you get off the other train the other side, and then you get a taxi the other side. Crispin, do you want to come in on that regarding, you know, the end-to-end and how we can help the environment on that front?
Totally. The transport sector has always gone from sort of, let's say, station to station or bus stop to bus stop. It hasn't wanted to do that. It's just been the way it is. Actually, we all know people travel from door to door, from house to house, and back again. The challenge that what people face is you have to go, as I said earlier, to multiple sources to book that and to keep informed. The challenge for operators to deliver that is they need to go out there and integrate modes into one place. It's exactly the same challenge for local authorities. What we have done, we have built our platform with integration in mind. It is a multimodal service. So we take the pain away from the operators, we take the pain away from the local authorities, and we enable people just to come one place to get everything they need. I just want to pick up on something actually that Grant Shapps said earlier. I've got to observe, we are rubbish in this country about saying how good we are, especially in the transport space. If we go back, let's say 18 months, the railway, we were the first railway in the world to offer personalised messaging, personalised support from door to door. Nobody else does that. We do that in this country. We Zipabout power it, but that is live in National Rail Inquiries and has been for some time. We should shout about that. Exactly the same for Oxford Bus Company, who Katy Taylor will be really familiar with. We have a local bus company that offers personalised door-to-door support for all of their passengers. We should be shouting about this. This is great British technology and genuine innovation.
And Katy, can you come in on that about why that's so important for you as a business?
Well, I want to touch on the multimodal bit actually, and you mentioned a bit in your introduction, Katy, about active travel. Active travel and public transport are immensely good bedfellows, and they're a really important part. And what we need to do, I think, is work a lot harder at getting people to value that bit of active travel that they potentially do with their journey. So, for example, my kids absolutely moan their lives off about having to walk to the bus stop. But again, during lockdown, the level of inactivity around our children has been absolutely immense, and that's going to lead to real health implications going forward. So actually, if we can encourage people to value the time that they take, the headspace that you get, you might listen to some music, you know, that's really good, valuable time, either walking or running or getting a bike, and making sure that it works at the other end. So we've done pretty well actually on bike parking facilities across our train stations. They're pretty good, but they're quite inaccessible sometimes. Sometimes you have to lift your bike over, you know, lift it up instead to get across the lines maybe. Bus stops again, but you know, you talked about mobility hubs. Mobility hubs are about joining up that active travel element alongside the public transport bit, and we need to make that easier. And we talked a bit about rural transport, and rural transport is a gazillion times harder than urban transport. Because urban transport, there are lots of people, which means the economics of running a bus or a train work. Rural transport is tough because the economics don't work, because it's not that many people going in the same direction at any particular given time. But I think there are things we can do. So demand responsive transport, smaller vehicles are definitely potential here. But I think electric bikes are a really good idea. So my mum lives in a Cotswold village at the bottom of the hill. If you had electric bikes that you could hire, and if she could get an electric bike to somewhere where there was a really regular bus, doesn't have to be that frequent. Let's not kid ourselves, she's 72, she's not got any major appointments that need to be on time, but she could then get to where she needs to go to. So there's things that we could do to do that. And I mean, I'm hoping the bus strategy, and then there's a rural mobility consultation as well, those are really good, important opportunities we have of better connecting up and making that active travel, public transport connection and journey. It won't ever be as easy as the car, because the car sits outside your front door, you've already paid for it, it's a sunk cost, and it'll go exactly to where you want to go. But actually, if we can make it better for your health, because you're going to get some exercise, better for your well-being, because you're going to get some fresh air, and social inclusion, because you're going to talk to some people on that bus, and it's actually going to save the environment, then maybe that's a choice that people might actually make, rather than it just being a choice that they have to make.
And potentially, Katie, I'd add more reliable, because one of the problems we have with our cars is the roads get bunged up and it's difficult to get about. But actually, because we have there's priority for on the rail, because there are rails that don't necessarily get bunged up in the same way that they do too often, but they should run direct. And even things like buses with different types of priority means they can get places on time. That's what's happened in London. That's why it's become so convenient to take a bus in London. Manchester just took a big decision yesterday to go with franchising. That's out of the 2017 Bus Act and also the National Bus Strategy this week. So, these things which make it easier to jump on and off, get on a tram, get on a bus, integrate it with bikes for hire or e-scooters or whatever, are the way that it's going to be much easier to use that public transport that's available, rather than jumping in your car. And then that's a kind of self-fulfilling thing, because the more people who are doing that, again, releases more road space, and the whole thing is a virtuous circle. Of course, the other thing, I just want to add this, Katie, is that I to both Katies, I massively believe in building roads. We've got a £27.4 billion road building program, and so I think we are the first government that I can remember for a long time who both pro roads and essentially therefore pro cars, particularly electric ones, but also pro buses and trains and trams and bikes and walking and cycling, and bikes and cycling may be the same thing, but you know what I mean.
I know exactly what you mean. And also, you've got to think about the fact this economy's got to get back to normal. And so people need to deliver things. Small businesses are the lifeblood of the country, and they've been stuck at home, not being able to deliver the goods to people that need them the most. Can I come to you, Tim, next around? And I know I keep on giving you questions from the audience, but I know people are very keen on this particular question, because it does link up on several of our things. Got a question in and says, what do you think the impact has been on towns and cities that were already at an economic disadvantage pre-pandemic? How much might rail support their future economic prosperity? So, as we build back better, and we try and look into the areas that maybe might not have been top on the list of housing, might not have been top on the list of job opportunities, but could be in the future.
Well, Katie, I'd love to complete the circle of that conversation before we move on to that question, if that's okay with you, because I think because I think there are two dimensions of what we've been talking about I just wanted to come back to. The first one is the ways in which we can incentivize behavior change and encouraging people to try different modes. And I think Crispin, this links very nicely into the Zipabout offer as well, and some work that we've been doing for over a decade in the Netherlands. This is about encouraging people not to drive their car and consider alternatives, and using cash as an incentive, as a reward in the Netherlands for people choosing not to drive their car at peak period on a particular motorway. So a series of experiments pre-COVID, but the purpose was really to try and encourage people to find different ways of traveling and break a habit. And I think that's really, really important, because the things that need to come together to make this work is only those people use the roads that really need to use the roads, because that then means you get journey time reliability. We talked about freight deliveries, and there will be some people for which they don't have an option. But for anyone else who has an option to not travel at all, let's not forget that. But for those that do need to travel, can use linked up integrated journeys and active travel and all the things that we talked about in public transport. What might make it easy for them to do so in the future is this concept that we in the industry call mobility as a service, which in effectively is bundling together access to a wide range of different transport services, via an app, like you might see with ride-hailing services at the moment. That's the point at which it gets super easy to connect your journey from A to B and to move from all these different modes. And I think, to me, those are the two really important aspects I just wanted to draw out. Incentivizing people to break a habit, try something different. And when this all comes together in the future via this concept of mobility as a service.
I think you're right, and I think that incentivizing people to do the right thing, if you think about in the past how we were incentivized not, or there were penalties for using plastic bags. We are incentivizing people. We're saying to people that your route back better to going back to normal is to make sure you have your vaccination. There are ways and means we can communicate to people across the country in all different communities about how we can progress that in the future. Can I come back, Tim, to the question that's been posed, only because I would like to encourage questions from the audience. We have a few stacked up already, and I'm going to plough through them as quickly as possible. And that question was around going, the most disadvantaged communities who in the past wouldn't necessarily have been the places of choice for job opportunities or housing, but now we are maybe working to a more hybrid model. It might be their opportunity. How can we make sure the transport system delivers for them as well?
Well, I guess this is all about making sure that the precious investment is pointed at the locations where it stands to deliver the greatest gain, which I guess comes back again to the value that we have in data that helps us understand what customer needs are, and then we can make these decisions and business cases to invest to give them the services and the solutions that are most likely to meet those needs. But I'm guessing, Katy, looking to you, that this is something that will be real and very present given your services.
Yeah, I'll just add to that. There's something here about joined up thinking and about collaboration, which has to be one of the strongest, I don't know what you call it, strengths or values, because what you need is housing estates that are built far away from amenities. We know that they lead to mental health problems, we know that they lead to physical health problems, and they're poor for accessibility to jobs. We have various funding, Section 106, but actually, is it really joined up enough? Are we really looking at what are the transport links when housing estates are built? Hospitals are often built away town centres now because of the space. How are we making sure we link up and we're not making it so that people have to drive to those hospitals? So I think for me there's something here about cross-government thinking, which is the National Audit Office did a report, it came out during the pandemic, it's all a bit of a blur of time, but it showed of all the government departments, something like 2/3 of them have objectives that would be served by investing in buses. I think that goes to your point about the fact that 2/3 of all public transport journeys are by buses. They generally do serve the least well off in our communities. That's why their numbers haven't fallen so much during lockdown, because they move so many key workers to those jobs. So actually it's about saying, how else can we link that up with hospitals, with health services? How can we link it up with the employment office? How can we do better to offer, we do offer free transport, I know certainly in Brighton, to people who are unemployed, so that they can get to job interviews, so they can get the job that gives them the money to be able to travel more frequently. So I think it's a really powerful opportunity for cross-government thinking and cross-local authority thinking about how you use transport as a real enabler for all of those opportunities, social inclusion and everything that it has the power to really deliver on.
And it shows how flexible the system can be, because the reputation is that this is not a very flexible sector, and it can be a bit backdated, and in terms of some of the innovation, and that's not the case at all. And I think that one of the things that jumps out from this panel discussion today is that there's so much innovation going on within the sector itself that can benefit us, and indeed, you know, is picked up around the world. I know that Zipabout has interest from around the world in terms of what you're doing here in the UK. Citrus, can I come back to you and ask you a question that's just come in about the skills workforce, because it does come off the back of what Katy just said. You know, our transport system of the future, what skills do you see that will be required from you know, the general population to deliver the best transport system that we can? You know, how might that change in time?
Well, it's absolutely huge in terms of the range of skills required. The reason I kind of particularly been thinking about this is my son, who's 16. I was just kind of thinking about, he's doing A-levels, and he was just thinking about whether he was going to go to university. He actually doesn't fancy going to university, and he was looking at apprenticeships and went to a you know, a school thing at school, or online I think it was, and he was so many of them were HS2 related, but they weren't all HS2 building the rail. It was, you know, everything from logistics to planning to design to engineering to advanced science. I mean, it was right the way across the gamut. Yeah, and I think that is actually, if that's true in rail, it's true in bus, it's true in every aviation for sure, maritime. There's so much technology going into the stuff now. So if you think about, you know, in much broader terms, you think about shipbuilding. This country used to build most of the ships in the world, and understandably, over a period of time, it became cheaper to build them elsewhere. But actually, what's required to build ships in the 21st, going into the 22nd century, I mean, probably the second half of this century, will be much more advanced ships, because we now need to reinvent them as zero carbon machines, and they're the biggest form of transport. They move around. This might sound quite abstract. They move around 95% of all the goods that we get in this country by sea. And we've got to reinvent their entire propulsion system. Now, if that's not a job for British scientists and British universities and apprenticeships and, you know, so on and so forth, I don't know what is. And that's just one aspect. We've also said we're going to be the first country in the world to create zero carbon flight, so you can fly guilt-free. The Jet Zero Council is the body that's doing that. I chair it along with Kwasi, the Secretary of State in business. And you know, what a challenge. Now, how are we going to make these aircraft fly zero carbon? You know, it might be hydrogen, it might be using sustainable aviation fuels, it might be using carbon capture, who knows? But there's an enormous number of job opportunities in that, and you go through every single form of transport, and this is no longer just, here's how we've done it for the last 50 years, so these are the set jobs. It's now about science and logistics and STEM, and there are a lot of great jobs, as I said, as I saw through my son just having to look at the number of them which were around HS2, but things that I would not have immediately have thought of if I was instantly thinking about what HS2 does.
Is that an opportunity for you wanted to come in on that?
Yeah, I just wanted to add, we have the first all-electric bus garage in Europe in Waterloo, near Waterloo Station. And I remember speaking to the chief engineer, and I said, you know, how have you, these are really hairy engineers. So these are people who, you know, got really greasy under buses and you know, to be honest, they're mostly in their 50s. And I said, you know, how have they adapted? How have they felt about this? And they said, it's brilliant. They've done sort of more or less the same job for, you know, 20, 30 years. And suddenly here's a vehicle that's battery driven. And so it's all computer. They literally take chips out, they feed that in and that's data, and they are loving it. They are loving that opportunity to learn something. If you just said to them, go off and learn about digital data, they'd have gone, oh God, not to me, not to me. But because it's in a bus, that feels quite comfortable. So even within the innovation that we're driving, it is allowing these opportunities for people who never thought they were going to be sort of data or scientists to do that side of things. So there's some really practical examples of how innovation is bringing those new skills into, you know, sectors or jobs that perhaps people never thought it would.
And it's really important to take people with us on that journey, rather than kind of leave them behind and say, well, you're part of the old technology and we're moving forward, and, you know, young kids are going to be doing this without you. And I think that's a really, really good example. It's a moment really for us to think about, you know, in a post-Brexit Britain, what are we going to be world leaders at? What are we going to be, what the rest of the world going to look to us and say, we would like your buses, or we would like your solutions around hydrogen. We want to talk to you about batteries. We want to talk to you about some of the technology behind some of the personalised journey planning. And so that's the way that we can kind of really show that we're moving forward, and we are very innovative in what we're doing. Can you talk to us just, I know that we're going to have to wrap up soon, Crispin, about some of that round the world interest about what we're doing here in the UK?
Absolutely. So just to sort of set the scene, let me just explain a little bit about what Zipabout does. So we provide a plug-in information service. I'll talk about plug-in in a second. And effectively, we enable operators and local authorities to support people on their journey from A to B, from door to door. Anybody who's listening to this right now, if you go on National Rail Inquiries, plan a journey, click Keep Me Updated. As soon as you do that, we will talk to you on Messenger. It'll shortly go out on other channels, but on Messenger, and we will support you with real-time information from door to door. We're doing exactly the same with Ox on Time, the Oxford Bus Company. Now, this, yes, it's easy to deploy. It's easy to run, and that means you can effectively lift and drop it anywhere in the world, so long as the data exists. This is a great opportunity to not only lead the way in the UK, but show how other countries can benefit from the technology we're developing here. Now, I want to pick up on something that we've touched on a couple of times, and that's behavioural change, and incentivizing behavioural change in all the right way. I've mentioned the service that we run for Ox on Time in Oxford. So we partnered with Oxfordshire County Council and Oxford Bus Company and another company called Eagle Eye that represents a number of high street brands. What we were able to do is use our technology to, in this case, when we ran the trial just before December, to thank people for using public transport and not taking the car, for example. It's very controlled, it's very small given the nature of COVID at the time, but it proved that this works. So what we were able to do for certain services that were selected by the bus company, we were able to thank the passenger for taking that service, sent straight to their phone. Part of that thank you was a redeemable QR code for a free cup of coffee. So just before they got off the bus, they received directions to the coffee shop where this could be redeemed. So it was a thank you for traveling, here's something on us. Now that's great for the passenger because they get a better journey. It's great for the operator because they get an opportunity to build loyalty, improve customer experience. And it's great for that brand because they get access to passengers, a group of people in a very, very controlled way, without any of their data passing to them, without them actually speaking to them. All this is done by the operator themselves. But if you think about it, the opportunity to reward a decision or to nudge or incentivize behavior, if it's personalized and aligned to the journey, it's limitless. You can thank people for using park and ride instead of an inner city car park. You can reward somebody for getting off a bus, a stop early, so they can get micromobility that we introduced them to. The possibilities here are endless if it's personalized, done in the right way and aligned to the journey. And that's exactly what we do.
Grant, can you see how the transport system can be connected to the high street in that way?
Yeah, absolutely. And actually examples of what Zipabout are doing and many others are very good examples. I talked about what Zipabout were doing last summer when I was doing a press conference during the first phase of coronavirus, and that we would be expanding the way that data is used to make journeys much, much more integrated. As Crispin and others have said, this is something that's already happening. My slight concern is that unless we deliver it to the places where people actually go to look for their information, they may never know that they can get a personalized service that will tell them exactly when the bus is going to turn up or the train's going to turn up, and help them to utilize that right from, sort of your point, right from home to their final destination. And so I think the kind of really interesting thing is the sort of, you've got the back end of this, but how do you deliver that to someone? We all immediately think, no problem, everyone's got a smartphone or apps or what have you. What about, but is that it? Or are there other ways to do this as well? Of course there are, through things like, the signage you often see at a bus stop. but also in the bus strategy, we've committed to making sure that there's much more information, both audible and visual, in buses that will help people with disability to use bus services and public transport more. And I want to drive up satisfaction, but actually particularly within that user group who often do not feel that public transport is their best way of getting around. I want to make it as easy for people with disabilities to get around as for anybody else on our transport system, because actually, if you aim to do that, you'll find it's easier for everyone. And that should be our benchmark. And that benchmark will make it easier for everyone. So again, comes right back to thinking about how you deliver that information, how you make sure everyone knows it's available. And then, you know, it's a bit like, I don't know, everyone listening to this will remember the first time they paid for something contactlessly. And I imagine everyone does now, particularly during the pandemic. And the first time that happens, you go, oh, was that it? What, I didn't have to, no PIN, oh, I didn't have to change, wait for a change. You don't need to confirm anything to me. I just tap and walk away. And the fact you can do that on public transport now removes friction. And I think it's making the data, making the information, making the experience as practical as possible in every possible way, remove the friction. And that is what we want to do collectively.
And a real opportunity, I think I was on mute earlier, but a real opportunity to bring people back to high streets, because, you know, we are not destined to be sitting at home having lots of people drop off brown boxes at our front door. You know, we want to go out, we want to socialise, we want to meet our friends for coffee and for drinks and go to the cinema and enjoy the high street. And we need to breathe life back into our high streets, and that's a way to connect the transport network closer to the places we want to breathe life back into again, isn't it?
I think that's true, and I genuinely think, having been cooped up for a year, there is massive pent-up kind of desire to get out there and to, you know, don't go and do it yet. We're not there yet, folks, in the roadmap. But when the time comes, all these people who say, oh, the transport system will be desolate, I don't agree with. Katy Taylor is right in saying that I think people will travel at different times of day. There'll be more flexibility, but it'll be a more efficient economy as a result. And then ultimately a bigger one, because where you create productivity, it enlarges the cake.
Right, so I'm nearly out of time. I've got lots of questions we haven't managed to answer, but I'm really grateful for everybody for submitting them. Can I just go around the panel quickly to just ask for summing up points? Tim, can I start with you first?
Yes, of course you can, and I'll go really briefly. Look, 2 points to me. First one, I made the point earlier about understanding customer needs and behaviours and tuning services in to deliver a great customer experience and deliver the outcomes that we want. And I think we've heard on the call, it's getting far easier to do that, particularly with more digital relationships with customers. And then secondly, I think it's really important to recognise that we can all go faster and deliver more if we work together and learn from others. And I'm seeing this thinking come through in innovation funding, actually. So it's the setup for the investment being made in the future transport zones. And I know through conversations with the teams in the West Midlands and the West of England, just how bought into this idea they are. Innovate in one place, share the learning with all places, and together collectively we go faster. But I guess the other dimension to that is thinking about how we can build on learning and import international experience as well. Crispin, you were talking about the flow going in the other direction, but it's really important that when we're bringing in innovation from other regions, that we check that it aligns culturally, behaviourally, and with the regulatory environment as well. And I got an example of where I've seen this done really well in the past. It was in London. So it was the approach that TfL took to the introduction of new cycling infrastructure. That was helped to make the PM's vision for cycling real when he was the mayor in London. Identifying best practice from Northern Europe around cycling, testing it through behavioural studies, piloting it on road, and then closely monitoring the impacts before rolling it out, working closely with the department. All that stuff was new to the UK, and it was standard in the Netherlands, which just goes to show to me that one person's innovation is another person's normal. Thank you.
It's a really good point there. Katy, can I come to you next about your summing up comments? Thanks.
I mean, I echo some of what Tim said about flexibility. I think this is about, we don't know what people are going to do out of the pandemic. We don't know if everyone's going to, over the course of 12, 18 months, go back to behaving exactly like they did in, February 2020, or actually are things fundamentally changed, and customers passengers, but communities don't really know that themselves. So I think being able to be really flexible and agile about how we adapt to that. So is it different times of day? Is it different types of train carriages? And some bits of our transport network are much more flexible than others. So our ability to change a bus interior, you could more or less do in a few weeks' time. To do that on a train is generally a few years. Actually, what can we do to make some of those elements of the transport network quicker and easier to change and to flex, and to be able to respond to what it is that customers need? I think there's plenty of data. We don't lack for data around what it is that customers, passengers, communities want. It's our ability to translate that into action and how we can action that really quickly. And I love Tim's idea about, piloting. We need to do more piloting, having a go, accepting that you can do something and it not work, but that's fine. We did something similar with demand responsive in Oxford. It worked in some ways, but it wasn't self-sustaining. It needs a different economic model. Brilliant. What have we learned? How are we feeding that in to future, demand responsive services? So I think that desire for flexibility and collaboration, I think, would be my final call.
Thank you. And a real driver for improved customer service, and that's the outcome. Crispin, can I come to you?
Absolutely. So, it's great to hear what everybody's doing. One of the things that I would like to close with, though, is the technology already exists to do a lot of what we're talking about now. We've got to remember that. Very often I get a little bit disappointed when I see money being set aside for new developments, for stuff that it's not new, that it's already there, and actually it's already live. So being aware of that is really, really important. The second thing, and I would say this, wouldn't I? We need to work out how, and it's probably, as Tim and Katy have said, through collaboration, through trialing, through being brave, is we've got to work out a way to get things live and get things out with the customer. Whether that's through testing concepts or actually getting proven technology out there working. It does take too long at the moment, and that is going to hold us back.
Very good point to end on. And Secretary of State, thank you very much for joining us today. Do you want to end with a few comments there? Just rounding up.
Only Sam, it's great to be on with such a great panel and with you as well, Katy, and I endorse those roundup comments from everyone else. Look, I think out of every crisis, be they wars or the way that the coronavirus has ravaged us and every country in the world, what we have to do afterwards is look to improve society. And I don't think things are going to go back to the way that they were, but I do think they can go back to something or go forward to something which is actually even better than the way they were. There was nothing particularly fantastic about being squashed in like sardines to rush hour commuting, whether it's on a train or bus or anything else. And we can do that better, and we can do it better with the kind of technology that Crispin and others have developed. We can do it better with the kind of services which are more flexible and are called in a more bespoke way. We do it better because if people are traveling more flexibly, not necessarily during rush hour and not necessarily every day of the week, then there'll be more space around them. But I don't agree with people who say, well, therefore need less transport. I took this job, as I said before, I asked for this job because I fundamentally believe in something that we all use, the transport network. It is impossible to be a British citizen without using it. Even if you're housebound, someone is coming to deliver stuff to you. And what we need to do is make it ultimately easier to get around. It's to state the obvious, but people will always want to be with people. And I think more so because of the way that we've been cooped up. It's where ideas are sparked, is where people bring their thoughts together and create something bigger than themselves. And brilliant as this Zoom has been done today, won't it be fantastic next year to be able to do this in person, or perhaps combine the two and have an outside audience and do it in person? And if we get all of that right, there'll be more reasons to travel in the future rather than fewer. And I'm looking forward to building that infrastructure with everybody else.
And I'm looking forward to hosting that, and I'd love to be able to do that later on in the year. It's been an absolute pleasure to chair this event. Lots of innovation and creative ways to build back better our transport system as we emerge from the pandemic. Thanks to everybody on the panel. I'm really, really grateful for your time. Thank you for attending and asking a question of this event hosted by iNHouse Communications. And all I'm going to do is leave you to say, have a lovely weekend.